I've taught classes in American music, American folk music, popular music, but my bread and butter every semester class is world music. Music from all over. And on campus, I'm certainly supported by this last spring semester. I went to a Korean dinner, they had a China night, they had an African night, they had a Caribbean night. Music and dancing and displays. Well, the Korean kids, of course, did, what would you guess?
Cowboy?
Mostly K-pop. K-pop is huge. It's on our hit parade here in America as well. And they would do choreography and they had lights and all this stuff. And then they did this court dance with the fans. It was very nice and old-fashioned. But every group had their own, what they do, the Caribbean Student Union. Well, we've got enough students here that represent the Caribbean. Well, you've got the Latin Caribbean, the English Caribbean, the Dutch Caribbean, the French Caribbean, the English Caribbean. I'll play cricket. The Spanish Caribbean all play baseball. They have their distinctive foodways.
What side of the road do they drive on?
I think on the other side. I think they're on the other side.
The wrong side.
And when there's a big festival, and there are festivals, Rochester's had a Caribbean festival for years. Well, it's their version of Carnival. But the real Carnival is in February or early March, and it calls for a parade and sexy ladies and all sorts of stuff. Well, you can't much do that outdoors in February and March. So Rochester's becomes a Caribbean festival in August or something like that. Brooklyn, the biggest one in North America, is in Labor Day. Steel bands galore. Thousands of people coming out and processing in the steel band, the Trinidad Tobago Carnival. Years ago, 40 years ago or more in Rochester, Al St. John came up from Trinidad and with about 12 other musicians, all hired by Kodak, they started the Trinidad Tobago Steel Band. There's a whole orchestra of these things over here, different sizes, maybe a drum set woven in there. Talking before, well, when I moved out here 45 years ago, they said, oh, it's a steel band in the Dundee High School. Dundee's about as white non-Caribbean as one could imagine back then. There's more Amish in town than there are Caribbeans. But they had a steel band. It just takes one person with the gumption to make that happen. Caledonia had a bagpipe band before I got here. People can make anything happen, and the steel bands are just wonderful. So Ted's hired me. Where's the RET now? U of R. As a student recreation opportunity, play steel band. When I was at Wesleyan, it was the Gamelan Orchestra. Kind of similar, all these metal instruments, and a whole bunch of people play them. And it's rather easy to start from scratch. Well, that's not what we're talking about here particularly, but we've got a few instruments over here. One of them is a rattle, right? A couple different kinds of rattles. This one. Who plays these? You can make from gourds or tin cans or all sorts of things.
That one's a horn.
This is cow horn. And rattles are one very much at home, not only with little babies over his toy, very much at home in many parts of Africa, and very much at home with many Native American tribes. And wherever Africa met Native Americans, which is actually many parts in the New World, we find rattles and other instruments. This is a Seneca rattle from the Allegheny Reservation, and you're right here, of course. You can easily go down there and see people playing these and powwows and all sorts of stuff. So we're not doing that, but I bring it along. Avery Emerson gave that to me 50 years ago. He was fun. He was there before they flooded it out, before Kimball and stories to tell about that. So you might see another rattle. In fact, that's one that Francesco, we may ask you to play the rattle with Dave Valores at the end of the thing, the rock case that we associate. Just a couple of stories. So this is ethnic traditions focusing on Western New York, because that's where we are, or from where I am, Geneseo points west. Well, it does include Rochester, includes Buffalo at festivals. An anecdote about the International Folk Festival up in Rochester. Years ago, there used to be one, Edie Korowitz, they had it at the Science Museum, and they had about 30 or 40 different ethnic groups in Rochester that came out and represented themselves any way they wanted to. The Turks were there with a belly dancer, sorts of things. Ukrainians, well, they brought a group in from Canada that had wonderful Ukrainian dancing, and Folkways. And there was one table there with 3 ladies sitting there in wonderfully colorful costumes. One was Latvian, one was Estonian, the other was Lithuanian. And each was hawking their version of sausage from their country at one table. They could have done music or sung songs, I guess, but they weren't. It was sausage. Different sausage from each place. I had a student write a paper, wonderful paper, on the Serb Fest in Hamburg. Anybody ever been there? The Serb Fest. I didn't know such a thing existed. Well, I know Serbs exist, certainly, and where you have a lot of Serbs, you're likely to have a festival. It means you have an Orthodox church. Wherever you have an Orthodox church, you might have a festival. And people that have distinctive foodways, and people that maybe hang on to the language more than other folks. We might come back to that. The first bubble tea I ever had. Who's had bubble tea? You like bubble tea? It was in the West Side Market in Buffalo, served up by a recent immigrant from Laos. And if I'd asked him, he could have sung a Laotian song, a lullaby or a pop tune or something. Buffalo, Rochester, they have all those. They can't compare to Brooklyn or Queens. There's like 150 or more languages spoken in Brooklyn. I've had students, because I'm at the State College, I've had students from Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Republic of Georgia. They all lived in Brooklyn. And they all said, yeah, we do a little family festival, a small, look, there goes a Ganser. They live in that pond over there? There it goes. Wow. I do bird census. Write them down. College culture clubs. I'm sure St. Bonaventure has some of these things, but can they compare with those at UB or Fredonia, the big state colleges that have a lot of variety and put a lot of emphasis on those? Well, we're going to play a couple Irish tunes, a little sampling of things here. Those folks, first of all, that are certainly widely represented here in Western New York, and the Irish came in maybe 3 broad types. You had the well-educated, for the most part, Anglican English-speaking, English with an Irish accent. This was my family. It's the same family that had Oliver Goldsmith in it, and they brought in Michael Balfa, an opera composer from Dublin area, people who were well-educated. And when that part of my family left from Dublin, all the kids were baptized in St. Patrick's Cathedral, Anglican, Church of England, 1849. Sailed up the Mississippi River, had enough money to buy a nice plot of land on the south end of Illinois, and then the father promptly died. So the rest of the families had adventure, but they were well educated. I found the auction when they sold their house. They had piano, Broadwood piano. That was top of the line piano. It's like having a Steinway here. It's very different than the other end of Ireland. The rest of the famine era migration. It was Irish here. It's got some Irish. The second that certainly populated rural New York and the town of York very much came from places like County Antrim in the north, and were all Presbyterians. Solid Presbyterians. It was the first church across Pioneer, New York early on were the Presbyterians, mostly from Northern Ireland. Right, their ancestors maybe had come out of Scotland way back when. That mix of, well, who's really Irish? They spoke English too, with an Irish accent. And several of them still, Fred Lately and others that I've known. And they played some of the same tunes, though, as the majority that came from the potato famine years and later was the Catholic, all south and west of Ireland, who didn't always speak English, who wound up more in the cities than the rural countryside. They set up neighborhoods with people from the same county in Rochester, and New York City, other places. Rochester is one of the top Irish populations within the top 5 or 6. Buffalo is another one. Syracuse with the upside-down streetlight. But the big ones, of course, in Boston and parts of New York, Yonkers, and so on. And I had Irish Catholic churches. St. Patrick's in Mount Morris, up where I live. You know who built that. They were the first Catholic churches across America for the most part. A few exceptions were mostly the Irish in the neighborhoods. And outsiders didn't come to those churches. And people in those churches didn't go to the other churches. That was still true when I was a little kid. I wasn't Catholic. The Congregationals, we didn't go in a Catholic church, and they didn't come in our church. Things have relaxed a whole lot. Often the Catholic Church could be rigidly divided. Middletown, Connecticut, where I did my grad work, there was a Polish Catholic Church right near it, an Italian Catholic Church, and right near that the Irish Catholic Church, and each one had its own school. And you just don't cross the door of the other one. Orthodox churches remain that way. Catholic churches have been forced to close down and combine. If the Italians in Mount Morris set up their own church, now they all go to St. Patrick's. And the old church is a rooming house. But the Orthodox Church is the Serbs, Albanians, Romanians, Ukrainians, Russians, and above all, Greeks. Stay with their church. Opa. And the Greeks are the best known. They all do festivals. They all have Saturday classes for kids to learn language. Let's keep Greek, Ukrainian. Orthodox Jews do some of the same, similar, but they don't have the festivals to the same point. So the Greeks, I looked up out here, St. Nicholas in Jamestown, maybe the nearest big Greek festival, am I right? Is there any others around here? 3 weeks ago, I looked at the church calendar. The ladies were all making spanakopita for 2 days. The next weekend for 2 days, they were all making baklava. The next weekend, the last weekend, they had the festival. Rochester's thousands of people turn out. They know how to serve food. But as soon as the sun goes down, they're dancing. So we'll play a tune. Let's do an Irish tune. We're just going to go through a little bit of a sampling here of things. So, I'll just do the jig with the concertina. We play this please. We brought a very portable bunch of instruments. I don't play the big Polish concertina. Jerry Darlick was a great player in Buffalo. I knew that played Polish concertina. Looks like this. Have they seen one of those? They're all the more prominent out in Chicago and other places. Every Polish band had one of those things. They also had a regular piano accordion and everything else. But the little concertina, the ones made in England, associated most with the Irish. A typical jig, 6/8 time. Yep, Irish dancers learn how to dance a jig, either slow or quick, or single or double, and they formalized it a great deal. Both of these tunes were played by Marty O'Keefe up in Rochester, who came after World War II. His brother had come to Rochester in the 1930s and actually appeared in the newspaper as one of the fiddlers appearing at various old fiddlers gatherings playing his Irish tunes from County Clare. And his brother stayed back in Ireland, fished on the Shannon River. After the war, decided to come over just to make enough money to go back and buy a proper boat. He had one of those old homemade Irish fishing boats. And he met a young lady downstate and decided he wasn't going back. Came to Rochester. Lived to be 103. He was still playing. At the Genesee Country Museum, still coming to sessions at Johnny's Irish Pub. He'd sit up there and drink at least 2 pints of Guinness. He'd sit outside and smoke a pack of cigarettes. Then he'd come in and play the heck out of it. concertina and the fiddle. He played the fiddle first, and it got to be uncomfortable for him. And he'd lost the ends of his fingers in a lawnmower accident at some point. So somebody got him a really nice concertina, and suddenly you could hear the tunes really well. And those two tunes, Happy to Meet and Sorry to Part, the first one. And the second one, well, he called it Leg of a Duck. The Union Army knew it as Bully for You.
Bully for you. Yeah.
Before that, it was Fatty Ugander. So the tunes pick up different titles for different people in different places. Leg of the Duck, it had kind of spicy lyrics to it. Here's to Mandy because she is Randy, the leg of a duck, the leg of a duck, things like that. But he played the heck out of this thing at the age of 102. He's still playing it. They're healthy, keeps you going. We need a Guinness. I don't think the cigarettes, I don't know. So, how many are Irish here? Part Irish, a little bit Irish. That's half the group. Half the group. Irish of the more Catholic persuasion? Irish of the more Protestant persuasion? We're mixed. We're mixed. The music is pretty much the same between those two. Maybe the Northern Irish is a little more Scottish influence. And depends where they moved to. The rural Protestant Irish crossed over into American folk things, fiddle tunes, square dance musicians and stuff like that. And still names like O'Brien or McNeil and stuff like that. So, Irish prominent, Italians, equally Catholic. In Rochester, it's about an equal population. And they're very strong with the Catholic Church. Of course, you used to have the Irish Catholic and the Italian Catholic and the schools and everything else. Mount Morris, it was the Church of the Assumption, was the Italian tune. When they showed up and they came, they worked on the railroads, they worked in the salt mine, they worked in the vegetable fields and the canning plants. I've got a wonderful picture at home from Oil City, Pennsylvania. It's the oil field. And the musicians there, one is holding a organetto, one's holding a tambourine, the other one's holding this great big Italian bagpipe, 1904. Well, the bagpipes have kind of disappeared, but the accordions grew, the big ones. Let's play the, I've got to play first of all this one. There it is. Glenn and I and our good friend Karen Canning started a project many years ago up in York, New York, in the town hall. We sort of put the word out, Italian musicians, come on out, let's play some music. Because mostly they weren't. Like that folk festival in Rochester, Evie Kurovich went to the Turks, yeah, we got something, went to the Ukrainians, we got stuffed Poles, went to the Poles, went to everybody around town and got these 30 different groups. She went to the Italians, like the Knights of Columbus and the official groups. Would you like to represent yourself at the folk festival? And the answer was, we're not folk. They were never part of the festival. I went once to the Italian folk festival, the Italian festival, they didn't call it folk festival, the Italian festival in Rochester, and the featured music for the event was the Shintas, a family group many years ago. I think they wound up in Las Vegas eventually. And they came out on stage looking like Las Vegas, and for about 10 seconds played yum da dum da dum da dum dum, and they laughed. And then they went to Frank Sinatra songs. As more Italian urban musicians were creating pop music, Guy Lombardo, Frank Sinatra, Perry Como, right, a very important strain of popular traditions, mirroring some of the classical traditions. The old barber I used to go to in Middletown, Connecticut, I'd always go on Saturday, and he'd always had the Metropolitan Opera on, because mostly they were Italians. He liked that. To him, that was a musical. And the trained, sophisticated kind of music that came out of those, not yum da dum da dum. Well, Nick Passamonte, we had the Passamontes in Mount Morris. I'm sure there's similar families out here. They'd come with the salt mine crew who lived in Little Italy, maybe. That's where the top factory town that was there. Gus was a barber, but Nick Passamonte said his father, who'd come from Sicily, with a bunch of the salt miners, would sit around in a circle with a jug of wine, and somebody would play one of these. And they'd cup their hand behind their ear. So I'll just play a little bit here. You brought me one from Italy when you were over there once. Look, they still sell these and play them. Go online, search out. Well, the English word jaw harp, but if you find the Italian word, you can find some wonderful. There goes that duck again. That's what Nick remembers. Nick and, was it 6 brothers, the Passamontes?
I have one and I can't figure it out.
Oh,
You,
they're not difficult. We can talk about it when we're
oh, that's
done.
great, thank you.
I pass them out in class. Half the class doesn't want to touch it, put it in their mouth.
Well, I
The other
didn't-
half flail away at it and have a great time. Jaw harp, we call them now. The Old English called them Jews' harps. But there's a name in every language. One of the Italians words, scaccia pensieri, scatter of thoughts, but that's not the Sicilian word, malazzano or something like that. But by Nick's generation, the next generation, the ones that some were brought here as kids, it was around 1910 or so, the Mount Morris newspaper comments, oh, the Italians are starting to name their kids English names, like John. And they started going to newer instruments, so the mandolin, and the guitar, and the accordion, the little boxes, and then the big accordions, and violins, of course, came from Italy, the initial ones. The mandolins, you got one over here. You want this one?
Yep, yep.
The ones from Italy look like this. Wow. The Irish like to call them tater bugs because they're little like a potato beetle. But there were groups coming from Italy and touring with these things, to America in the 1850s, 60s, perhaps 70s. They certainly came with the immigration, but they also became popular through Europe. And with the mandolin, just as important, was this. We just call it a flat pick now, but it was a mandolin plectrum back then. Got adapted for all sorts of things. The mandolin was usually backed up by a guitar in the old Italian. One guitar, first, second mandolin. That was the classic ensemble. And the Passamontes, Frank played the guitar. Nick could play the mandolin, sort of thing. And used to have one of those, but Americans created a preference for some version. Now this is an odd looking one, but it's sort of a flat back mandolin, right? They took the round back away and created all different shapes. Some are very fancy, some are very expensive. And they're less and less played by Italians, but played by lots of other people. Central bluegrass, country music, right? By 1900, 1910, you could buy them from Sears and Roebuck, Montgomery Ward, catalogs. You can mail order, just the way we can go online and order a mandolin today if you want. But and the American versions took over, but college groups, Geneseo had mandolins. Brockport, I got a picture of the Brockport Mandolin Banjo Club in 1890, something like that at schools. Picked up on the mandolin. It was small, convenient, a wonderful little thing. Play chords or play a tune. We'll come back to it, but let me do one other thing here first. There, you're going to do the tambourine and the accordion, then we'll do a sentimental tune. You can play that. But the tambourine. This is like that picture of the oil field workers. They might have done this too. some Italians we got here. Got some Italians? It gotta be some, yeah.
British.
Mount Morris, years ago, they had a teacher that was trying to teach all the kids to dance with their umbrella.
Yeah.
Yeah. All those Italians that were going to St. Patrick's Church.
Right, yeah.
The waltz, so play with the tambourine. So Al Mastrolio was a great friend of ours. Passed away a year ago, 2 years ago. He was pushing 90. I think he was born in Naples, but his father had come to America first. Maybe worked in salt mine, I'm not sure. Then went back to Naples. I think he was born and came back and lived the rest of his life here and played guitar with that group of Italians we got together. But he also played with Kelly's Old Timers, the square dance music. He could play swing tunes, a little bit of light jazz, all that stuff. And this was a tune just Glenn and I, we haven't heard this in 30 years, so Al used to play this tune. A sentimental Italian waltz. He called it Viene Su, which is the beginning of some longer title. And said the older brother of the Basamanis was a barber, Gus Basamati, who could call square dances in Italian. And there was an older Italian quadrilla, and at least one of the tunes that Fred played was derived from one of those old Italian tunes. Fred Laidley was not Italian, but he'd hang out with all those guys, and he played square dances too. The barber, the Italian barber. When I moved to Geneseo, we had an Italian barber. By the 1930s, 20s and 30s, probably most of the barbers in most of the small towns were Italians. If you go back to 1870, 1890, a large proportion of the barbers in small towns were African Americans. And some of those were musicians. And many of the Italians were musicians. Somehow those two kind of went together. The barbershop's very important in African American tradition. Now we think of it mostly in the cities. It's in Rochester, Geneva, Syracuse, Buffalo. And it's rarely part of the rural villages anymore, but the Italians kind of persisted. And I know the old-time barber in Geneseo had taken over from his father, who'd been there ahead of him. The shop's full of pictures of customers. He's always playing music on the radio. The barber there in Middletown, Connecticut had a mandolin and a guitar hanging on the wall waiting for anybody to pick them up as guys. Just men would go in those places, would hang out and maybe play some music. And that's what the Pasamanis said they would do in Gus's barbershop. They'd sit in there and jam. So, foodways and festivals. Right? The Italians are best known for food and wine. And Glenn can demonstrate endlessly Italian food and wine. And you'll hear the Shintas or Frank Sinatra songs. There used to be a good restaurant over in Graziano's in Utica. On the wall, prominently, picture of Frank Sinatra. There he is. It's an iconic image. Equally associated with food. One chord.
What am I doing?
So we're going to practice with everybody. You're going to play one chord. You don't need the...
Oh, boy, I'm playing the mandolin. Okay.
one finger across those two strings
Okay.
right there, second fret. Giving her an A modal. Now the rhythm is a little interesting. Typically great. Try it. Francesca, Glenn's daughter. Over
This
here.
on the
That's
third
lots
fret?
of fun. Second fret. And two, just wash your finger down so you got two strings together. And then the next string over too.
Oh,
Those two.
oh, that's two.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, if we come right, we're supposed to be in a line. We'll do it out here. We've done Greek dancing. Somebody go in there. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. A well-known Greek dance tune, the Kalimatamas. We played that once in intermission. It was doing an Irish session, and the owner of the local Greek diner came in. We played that tune and bought us a wonderful round of drinks. So watch for a Greek festival. Right? They do festivals, they do it very well, and they can do food very well. Greeks. Came to America. Not far from Greece, of course, are Turks. And if there's been a lot of animosity, there's also been a lot of shared traditions between the two foodways, among others. Turkish coffee is the same as Greek coffee. All the grape leaves stuffed in lamb and all these things that are part of those. So look for St. Nicholas's Festival in Jamestown. Is there anything in Olean that's specifically Greek?
Lebanese.
Maybe a diner. Now, Lebanese is also very similar, of course. It's right there at the end of the Mediterranean. And there used to be a gentleman that ran the Casablanca up in the south side of Rochester that would have what he called Mediterranean night. And he'd have a band up on the stage, and I remember going there once, and the band had, I think, a Lebanese, and maybe a couple of Palestinian guys, and a Jewish guy was there, had a couple of the Turks were there, and they were all, and a Greek guy, and they were all kind of sharing a kind of common musical, right? They all do things in 7/8 time that we just did, and people were dancing out there. And the dances, of course, my big fat Greek wedding was great. Showed what the dances looked like and the food and all that stuff. So, the largest non-English speaking population across much of America and certainly in Western New York were the Germans. Right. Well before the revolution. A lot of Germans here. Some came out of strict religious persuasion, right? Those we know as the Amish and the Mennonites and others. Well, they didn't do festivals, they didn't play musical instruments, they still don't. And they might still speak German though and share some of the German foodways, but the greatest number that came west through the canal in the early days, a great many stayed in Buffalo and all through western New York, all through Erie County, all through Wyoming County, and I'm sure a fair share here in Cattaraugus County as well. German names. When I first moved out here, I went to the Pike Fair. First year I was here, the Pike Fair. Go to Pike Fair.
Oh, yeah.
And looked at that thing, what do you call it? The Ferris wheel, full of kids. They were all blondes. They were all blondes. You know, I'm coming out of New England, my grad school, and going up other places. They're all blondes. Well, those are Germans and Poles, Wyoming County and neighboring Erie County, who knows where. I had a wonderful visit years ago with Albert Doze. He was 96. Played the harmonica. And this is made by the Hohner Company. Hohners were among the developers of the harmonicas way back in the 1840s, 50s. They were the number one company for making mouth organs, as they were known. Around early 1900s, they started buying out many of the American accordion, or the European accordion companies, and became prominent in that field as well. And Albert, I get about 2 hours of recordings of Albert Doze playing all these old German tunes. So he said he used to play the mouth organ. His father played the button accordion, and his mother played the pump organ. In Bethany, New York is where they were, and I knew him. He lived down by the lake in Perry. Musi Den, you know that one? Me Germans together. If you put the words in front of me, I can sing a verse. Maybe someone knows this tune. This is a Hohner button accordion. Now, the world of accordions, by the way, if we'd gone back to the Italian world and we called the musicians in, we got Sandy Consiglio from Perry. Played a big plug-in piano accordion. It was Italians that introduced the piano accordion primarily to America. There were some Germans making them, but the Italians, Pietro Diabro out of New York City, played patriotic tunes and recorded for Columbia or Victor Records big time on his piano accordion. Lawrence Welk talks about getting his first piano accordion. He paid $400 for it, I think, in 1916. That was real money in 1916. Put himself in hock to his father to work on the farm for 3 years or something like that. They were very expensive. The old pictures we have, the Italians up there around Mount Morris played the little ones, the little organ that does, but Sandy played the big one. It was Roxy Kakamis out of Batavia. Went around, they described he had a car with a rumble seat in the back, and he'd full of accordions. He'd come by and convince people to buy them, and then he would teach them. And he had big classes of people playing piano accordion. And all the ones that we grew up with, the piano accordions around, had all gotten their instruments from Roxy and learned to play. So they started out with these, and then they started adding all the electronics to these big accordions. Any accordion players here? Any accordion players? They got heavier. The equipment got heavier. The Greek Festival in Rochester for years had a piano accordion player playing behind the bouzouki guy and the drum set and everything else. And it was clear that he was getting older and the accordion wasn't getting any lighter. The next year he came with a keyboard. And I've known more than a few accordion players. The Macedonian Festival, another Orthodox church festival in Rochester. 2 keyboards and a drummer doing all those sounds that the accordion used to do. Well, the Irish still like the little ones. French Canadians like the little ones. Cajuns like the little ones. Mexicans like the little ones too. In any case, so here's a tune that goes way back in German tradition. And you know something? nichts werden Herzen, du, nichts werden Sinn, du machst mir viel Schmerzen, weiß nicht, wie gut ich dir bin. Ja, 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 weiß nicht, wie gut ich dir bin. So, wie ich dich liebe, so, liebe auch mich. Die zärtlichsten Briefe für dich allein, nur für dich. Ja, 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 für dich allein, nur für dich. You alone, I love it. You know that one? I mean, that's best known, the older, early 19th century tunes. The German bands can all play that. And dancing waltzes. If you find a German, it's usually the Oktoberfest, right? Everything's got so shut down the last 2 or 3 years. And there's been doing Oktoberfest? Hamburg, oh, sure, there's a huge one in Hamburg. The one in Rochester didn't reappear. Not much up and around it quite. The one German restaurant we used to go to out in South Warsaw.
Yeah, right.
The owners aged out.
And
they took it over.
Heidelberg, yeah.
And it's hard to find a good German restaurant anymore. But you go to the big Oktoberfest Hamburg, I'm sure there's some very good food that's there, the Schweinbraten and all that stuff and all those. So I lived in Germany 4 years, so I got to like all that food a whole lot. I learned German in part from hanging out with the bratwurst seller down on the street in Gießen, Germany. He was happy to talk to me. And the food was great. I'm looking at my notes here, just got to leave something out there. Those will do. Here in western New York, right, reaching into Cattaraugus County, certainly Chautauqua County and neighboring Warren County, in southern Erie County, who's there in great numbers? A lot of them named Johnson. Swedes. My name is Jan Janssen. I come from Wisconsin. Janssen. The Danes in Penn Jensen. My Norwegian mother-in-law, Johannes, and some version of that. And the big day they just celebrated was Hunstag. Hans, Norwegian for John. Hunstag. That's all my mother-in-law knew for the summer solstice. Longest day of the year, it's Hunstag. It's not quite, right? They've diverged a couple days. So we're St. John's Day today, tomorrow, St. John's Eve. Is that today? Is that tonight?
Tomorrow.
Is tomorrow the real St. John's Day?
That is the 25th, isn't it tomorrow?
I'd have to look it up, I'm not sure. I went to the Puerto Rican San Juan. I went to the Puerto Rican St. John celebration in Battery Park in Manhattan one year. And the Spanish-speaking cardinal was there, and they had a statue of the saint, and they had lots of Puerto Rican foods and so forth. Montreal, it's a big blowout drunken festival on St. John's Day in the old town in the summertime. And for Norwegians, it's the day you build enormous bonfires and you sing songs, sort of thing. Her last trip to Norway, she wanted to be here for St. John's Day. Hunstag, we're there. But Scandinavian music, Folkways, of course, Christmas is supreme. Christmas, I'm sure the Swedes do a big thing for Christmas over there. Anyone know any Swedes here? Any Swedes? Not one. And they have a Scandifest every year with piano accordion players. But it's Scandifest, right? Trying to sort of put it all together, Scandinavians. Well, this is like a lot of traditions. There's, of course, a lot of Scandinavians in Minnesota, where Norwegian is the second spoken language out there. But it's mostly just Swedish in Jamestown. The Danes in Yates County. The Finns in the sort of Twin Tier area south of Ithaca. We don't have any Norwegians up here. My mother-in-law and a couple others, that's about it. Brooklyn, Norwegian Museum, the Siemens Museum, and all sorts of things like that. But I can play a couple tunes that all those people know. Rich Koski, a fine Finnish musician from Trumansburg, Spencer, in that area. They used to do Finn and square dances. They do traditional Finnish dances, and then they do a square dance set, and then more Finnish dances and a square dance set. But they all knew this tune, and the Swedes know this tune, and my Norwegian mother-in-law knew this tune. What might you dance to that? The schottisch. The schottisch. Which is still danced in those communities out in the Midwest. And they play tunes like that, the schottisch. Just a little bit. Ken Roloff used to always play a schottisch at his Pembroke square dances up there, and I think that's partly because the Poles might dance the schottisch as well. What else we're going to do maybe? And there is a dance called the hambo that's specifically Swedish. And I once visited with Kenny, what was her first name? She was in her 80s in Jamestown, and she had this book of all the tunes she'd written out for all the dance bands that she'd played with. Louise Kinney. She'd written out all the tunes with the chords. Wonderful. We went right down to Kinko's and got a copy of the whole thing. And there's several pages of Swedish tunes because she played with local Swedish musicians. She played with local square dance musicians. She played a little bit with Italian musicians and others. And it's just an encyclopedia of these old-time dances from Jamestown. And a couple of hambos in there. But the hambo is a yum da da dee dee yum ba yum dee 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 yum ba yum dee 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 dee, that kind of rhythm. And they dance a hambo in folk dance classes. We did them at Cornell when I was there many years ago. It's one of those couple dances you need to balance just right and you spin around. And in the heady world of international folk dancing in the 1960s and the 70s at Cornell University, you had to know your partner. Nothing worse than trying to dance that dance with somebody that couldn't do it. Much easier dances are part of the traditional Danish community over in Yates County, the dairy farmers that came from the far north of Denmark 120 years ago. And they're still there. But increasingly the older musicians have all passed away, and I find that I'm one of the key musicians still showing up and playing the tunes, which I don't like at all. I like the tunes, and very few people are dancing anymore. But one of the key dances, we did it at their summer picnic 2 weeks ago over here. Dance goes like this, or you can all do it. Clap. That's kind of do it. So you face your partner. There's a whole bunch of those dances like that. Clap. Yeah, the bum bum bum. Or you do it. Clap. Yeah, the dee dee dee. Da 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 dee dee. Clap. Left hand to dee dee dee. Da 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 dee dee dee. And then yeah, da da dee 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 dee. Da 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 da. Then you polka. Yum dee dee dum bum da 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 da. Right at the end of the polka, you gotta get just right. Your clap. Yum.
Listen, me do it.
So you gotta get the clap going here, right?
Show me how to do it.
It's a fun dance. Many years ago, a couple came from Copenhagen, I had a youngish couple, 30ish or so. He was hired somewhere in Rochester, and they had danced in a professional performing folk dance group in Copenhagen. Well, of course, these dairy farmers had all come from the north rural areas, had come to Yates County, and kept on doing what they knew when they came from the old country. They were never in a professional performing group. And this group tried to teach them all the proper performance folk dances, which is a little parallel to the modern Western square dancing. The idea, you got to teach you to do it right. The old way you've done and your grandparents did it, no, that's no good. And they tried. A couple went back to Denmark. They never did one of their dances. But they did this last June, and we're there at the... So it's a... Here we go.
You got a band.
Great fun. The polka, of course, brings another prominent Western New York population, Polish. Dingista. Red and white. It was in Hamburg. I went to a big polka weekend years ago, and there were 2 stages, and it was one of the hotel kind of places, party house. People could stay the whole weekend. They had rooms. There was a bar going down there. 2 stages. One band would stop, the other would start. Non-stop dancing. All kinds of advertisements for polka cruises, polka festivals, and some fine polka musicians in Buffalo. I did Polish presenting for the Smithsonian Folk Life Festival way back then in 1976, and we brought musicians from Poland. I'd done a lot of field work over there, and I knew who I wanted to bring, and they wanted American parallels. And the Polish-American societies, a little like the Italian-American societies, said, no, we don't want folk. We want Chopin. We want classical singing societies on the mall at something called a Folk Life Festival. He said, well, what do Poles hire for a wedding? A polka band. Yes, we're going to have a polka band. And they were incensed. You can't have a polka band on the mall. That's a stereotype. It's, Stosh that goes bowling and does all this stuff. Eats kielbasa. Yeah, we had all of that. But I found when I was searching for musicians, American polka band to bring down to the mall for a week in Washington, D.C. They all belonged to the union. They were full-time professional musicians, and we had to find one that was willing to forego the union pay scale and work around that, because there's no way they could pay somebody to be sitting on the hall there for 6 hours every day for a whole week. We found a young band, and Kataniec and his polka dots out of Cleveland. They just loved being there. They could speak some Polish. They could play all these polka tunes. The Poles loved them from Poland, and they had a great time with all the Poles. So here's a polka tune. I don't have what I really need. I need a great big concertina, the big piano accordion that can do this, and the drum set, and the trumpets, and the clarinets, and the saxophone, and everybody else that became the American polka band. In Poland, it was led by a fiddle, maybe with a clarinet, and a second fiddle, and the bowed bass, no drum sets. And Poles, the polka had become an old-fashioned thing like foxtrot and tango. Over here, it became a symbol of being Polish. But I was in Poland, having lived here for a good long while. You recognize here, well, we got cities, we got country, but people tend to travel back and forth and be very aware and appreciative maybe of all directions. In Poles, there's a huge divide between the city and the country. People in the city didn't like these polkas or any of that stuff. People in the country didn't like what was going on in the city. Where was it? It was Wowicz. Wowicz, I get my violin here. Regional styles were very distinctive depending on where you were in Poland. So the Chicago Poles tended to come from the mountains of the southeast, and the music is kind of slow and a little wally, and certain kinds of tunes that were adapted from that. The New England polka bands were faster and different traditions. Where do people come from in Poland? Many Poles, of course, came from areas, Buffalo, like the Poles aren't far from the Germans. In Milwaukee, where you got Germantown and Polish town, but they're sort of next to each other, just like they are in the old country. And German Catholics had a lot in common with Polish Catholics. A lot of shared traditions. And they all eat sausages. And they all dance polkas. So, but they don't all dance obereks. They're just part of the Polish. The group that came from Poland on our festival had a young lady, a really sturdy young lady, who could do that. And the young man who was supposed to come with her, this is still communist Poland, was her partner, was replaced at the last minute by a communist functionary. The 70-something-year-old guy who just came to properly make sure everybody went back to Poland and that they behaved themselves. Couldn't speak any English. It wasn't useful in any other way. None of these people spoke any English. But so I had to dance with that lady, and I was worn out at the end of it. Dancing lots of obereks. Oh, the waltz. We played a wedding. It was Lily's wedding. Kushar married a Polish fellow from the Buffalo area. His parents were there. And at the wedding, I tried this tune, and at the end she was ecstatic. So it's my favorite tune. So the parents will dance a waltz. Chicago. The bus driver took us into a downtown restaurant. There's 1 million Poles in Chicago. Not a soul in the restaurant spoke any English. You could live there very happily. My guess is a lot of them were undocumented as well. But it was just but they would sing that song in the bus. Who's been to Dingus Day? How many Poles we got here? Who's Polish? How many Polish? Polish for a day, like Irish for a day, and everything. It's a big celebration. I watched it online this last year. It was wet, so people were wet anyway. But then they got all the wetter things in. We're down to our last couple areas here: Caribbean, Latin immigration, Cuban, Puerto Rican, Dominican. Right? In New York State, New York City, predominantly New York City. New York City was creating the blend of, well, the older Cubans, the rumba, the Ricky Ricardo, and the sounds that made its way into popular media and ballroom dancing over here, largely centered in New York City, but then Puerto Ricans coming. They're us, they're Americans. And salsa sort of being created in New York City, a blending of Latin traditions. And the infusion of those from the Dominican Republic, Sandy Sosa and all his compatriots, not just to play baseball, but it's the largest Latin community in New York City now, probably New York State, Upper Washington, that place up there. And dancing merengue, bachata. And the students at Geneseo have had workshops inviting the rest of us that look like stick figures next to the Latin kids that are dancing with wonderful flair and rhythm and everything else. And we brought some various rhythm instruments here, the maracas and but we're not really doing a tune from that tradition. West of the Mississippi, right, for the longest time, and in Milwaukee, when we were in Milwaukee for a meeting once, and we were meeting in an old hall, and across the way was the big cathedral. It's like St. Sebastian's in Rochester, not Sebastian, St. Stanislaus. It used to be a big Polish church, but gradually over the years the neighborhood had changed. It was now mostly Mexicans, right? West of the Mississippi, it's Mexicans. By far the largest number of immigrants coming into America, and an awful lot of farms were closed down without them. There's big farms out there, and food plants and all that stuff. But they pointed out at the meeting, well, the church is now still there, Roman Catholic, they're mostly Mexicans. They still dance in the halls, and they still dance polkas. Mexicans dance polkas. Poles, but they dance them differently, but there they are, polka bands. Glenn was at a family wedding. You can tell us about it.
Yeah.
Your niece.
My niece got married in Mexico a couple weeks ago. So the whole family went down there to San Miguel de Allende, and it was just a marvelous time. We're very excited about our new Mexican in-laws in the family, and at the end of the ceremony, I was doing the music for the ceremony, and at the end I sang a Mexican folk song that
Sing along with us.
that they requested, and of course all of the gringos at the wedding. Once I started singing this, it was the end of the ceremony, right? And so at the end of a wedding ceremony, we sort of get up and then we walk out and then go over to the bar or whatever. But all the Mexican family stayed in their seats and they sang every word of the song with me, and we had to go back and sing it again. and it was so much fun. And it's a song that actually has made its way into American music culture in some ways. It's made it into some evangelical church movements. It's a song called De Colores.
De colores se visten los campos en la primavera. De colores son los pajaritos que vienen de afuera. De colores es el arco iris que vemos lucir, y por eso los grandes amores de muchos colores me gustan a mí, y por eso los grandes amores de muchos colores me gustan a mí. The song says, in colors, the fields dress up in springtime. In colors, the little birds fly from afar, pajaritos. And in colors, the rainbow shines so clearly. And in this world of many colored loves, that just pleases me so. De colores se visten los campos en la primavera. De los grandes amores de muchos colores me gustan a mí. Y por eso los grandes amores de muchos colores me gustan a mí.
You might continue to play with this steel drum.
Oh yeah, stay up here. I can play steel drums.
From the Anglo-Caribbean world,
Yeah.
where they all play cricket.
Yeah.
We lived right near the college in Geneseo, and there was one year we had a girl living with us from Guyana, English-speaking Caribbean. She knew all the cricket players, the cricket fans. Then we had another girl another year from Sri Lanka, south of India. She knew all the cricket players and the cricket teams. This network of sports fans that never see themselves at the Olympics because the games take too long. But the Trinidad and Tobago people, they know cricket too. Isn't that Lucy?
Yeah.
Steel drums, as we pointed out before, well, they came from Trinidad and Tobago, being invented, developed out of other various pots and pans and noisemakers and raucous carnival processions, being very much refined by the 1960s and 70s down to the present. And when real carnival hits, right, the days before Good Friday, not Good Friday, before Ash Wednesday, it's a major blowout celebration in Trinidad and Tobago, and a huge competition between neighborhood bands who've worked all year learning by ear some other long, complicated arrangements of tunes and competing in the panorama of instruments known as a pan. And they come in many sizes. So this is
It would be as if in your school band program, okay, if you had all those different parts in a band piece, right, okay, and none of the students could read music, but the band director would go over and would say, okay, here's your part, and they would have to play it back again and memorize it, okay, and here's the next part of your part, and they teach it by rote this way, and then you have to remember the whole thing inside of your head, and the pieces are as complicated as a high school band piece would be with all sorts of things. These are still made out of 55-gallon oil barrels. Okay, the bottom of the barrel's flat, and they pound it down, stretch the metal into a bowl, then with a smaller hammer mark out each one of these dents, and the larger dents make a lower pitch, and the smaller dents make higher ones. This is very much the soprano instrument in the ensemble, the lead instrument. It's called the kind of alto instrument, double seconds. There's two of them one person plays. The tenor instrument they actually call cellos or guitars. They borrow those other names. 2, 3, or maybe even 4 drums that one person plays. And then the basses, there's 2 versions of the basses. One person either plays 6 barrels around them, okay, or there's an 8-barrel version of the basses also. So, but this is just the soprano instrument. Jen's been asking all evening if you know the tunes we were playing. So I'll just put that out to you ahead of time to see if you know this one here. Just a little slow calypso here. Right?
Kingston Town or
Something
some
town.
such?
Yeah. A Calypso song, right, popularized major by Harry Belafonte, but
Right.
Calypso is equally Trinidad, Tobago, and equally spread over to Guyana and Barbados and other islands. And at the big festivals, there's a night for Calypso and a night for the steel bands.
Jamaica Farewell, they call that tune, but you had some of the
You got the
lyrics there.
words. You
Yeah,
got the words.
yeah.
I'm sure. Want to play one more little tune?
Sure.
One more. This is the end of our program here. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you to the museum for this whole series they have of performances. I'm sure Glenn will be happy to have you look at the instrument up close and try playing it, or any of these things if you care to. Thank you all for being here tonight. Glenn McClure, I'm Jim Kimball, Francesca. Thank you all.